The Need for Speed series has gone through quite a lot in its history, some good, and definitely some bad too. From the iconic Most Wanted 2005 to the not-so-good Burnout Most Wanted 2012 to... Wait, what do you mean that's not the name of that game? To the controversy surrounding the mobile game microtransaction tactics of Payback.
Improve performance. Draw a speed card.
That's what cars crave.
No! 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 No!
To the surprisingly good Need for Speed Heat, Need for Speed has a varied track record, to say the least. Having gotten introduced to the series when I was a kid through Carbon, I've been playing these games on and off ever since. I haven't played games like Shift, Pro Street, etc., but I have played a plentiful amount of the main games. Looking back on it now, it's amazing to see just how famous 05 Most Wanted truly is. This game has become the definition of what an S-tier Need for Speed is, and is the main game that people cite as being the last good Need for Speed entry before the series would begin to deteriorate. Now, this isn't the first time I've seen this kind of behavior towards a game or multiple games in any series for that matter, and I'm sure that's the case for you too. Ace Combat, for example. The community constantly praises the Holy Trinity, Ace Combat 4, 5, and 0, despite how old those games are, citing those games as what an S-tier Ace Combat game is. Centering back in on Need for Speed, people to this day are making reviews, let's plays, and creating content around this game. And as you can see from this video, I am definitely no exception. Heck, not too long ago, a full-blown Pepega mod was made for the game, giving the game a breath of fresh air and providing plenty of laughs along the way too.
This is a nice car.
All of this begs the question, why is this game so idolized to this day? Why do people still turn to this game as the definition of what a Need for Speed game should aspire to be? Well, it'll be a bit of a journey for me to explain it all. In other words, it's gonna be a bit of a ride. Therefore, before we start this thing, I have to ask, how's your car running?
I want every single unit.
Everyone.
Sit down. How you feeling?
Ready to donate another car to raise the fund, baby?
Yeah.
Come on, man, you can't be real. I'ma show you what it is at the anthem bill. Shine, shine. If you wanna come and let me know, I'm right here. Put the pedal to the metal and go. How's your car run?
Need for Speed Most Wanted, the good one anyway, was released in 2005 for a multitude of consoles, with the most well-known version of the game being released for the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PC, with the latter of those three having access to mods to enhance the graphics and to add more cars to the list, among other things. There are other versions that were released for platforms such as the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, etc., but we'll be looking at the version that most people are familiar with for this review. I can't remember off the top of my head when exactly I got this game, but I remember when playing it as a kid, I could never seem to bring myself to finish it until late 2020, so not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. What you'll be watching throughout this video is my second playthrough of the game for a point of reference. So, in other words, it has taken me literally years to beat this game, and for a pretty obvious reason that'll be discussed later on in the video. To answer the question of why 05 Most Wanted is given so much praise, I'm going to conduct a regular review of this game, followed by addressing the question based on what was gathered. To start off, let's begin with the story. Stories in the Need for Speed franchise have mostly taken a back seat in favor of the core gameplay experience receiving the most attention, and this is a good way to handle things. After all, you want people to actually enjoy driving around in your racing game since that's what they'll be doing the majority of the time. Most Wanted is no exception, with the story not playing as big of a role. It's still there, but not as upfront and in your face about it as, say, Need for Speed Undercover, for example. Most Wanted begins with your character arriving in Rockport City in the now iconic BMW M3 GTR. You end up coming across Mia Townsend in an RX-8 and you have a friendly race against her up until Rockport Police's top officer, Cross, comes along to bust you. However, you're saved when he's called in to help stop a street race that's in progress. You then end up participating in another race which has you come across Razor, one of the game's primary antagonists. In order to challenge him and the other top street racers around here, you have to prove your worth by showing them that you can handle the heat. These top racers are known as Blacklist members, Rockport PD's most wanted street racers. Some more introductory races later, you end up being able to challenge the 15th member of the Blacklist, Razor. However, it turns out he messed with your car, or it could be that a hard slam to the wall did it, like in my playthrough.
Have to end the race fast.
Which allowed him to win the pink sled that gives him access to your ride, and then to add insult to injury, the cops show up. I'm honestly surprised that A, more cops weren't around for a single guy, and B, neither Cross nor his partner had their guns out. Then again, Most Wanted is unrealistic enough if you want to compare it to how real-world cars and police chases work, so seeing cops that actually have some human decency when handling suspects makes sense in this game's universe anyway. Luckily, because your ride just got taken from you, due to a lack of evidence, the Rockport police had to let you go. Mia, the racer that you encounter from the beginning of the game, picks you up from the station and tells you that Razor climbed his way up the blacklist using your ride, and if you want to get it back, you have to become the most notorious street racer in Rockport, aka become Blacklist member number 1, the Most Wanted. She aids you in getting set up with a safe house and also helps in getting you some wheels. And this becomes the primary premise of the game. Climb up the blacklist to get your ride back. It's not an overly complicated or super in-depth plot, but it didn't have to be. In this instance, I appreciate the simplicity of the plot. It cuts straight to the point, immediately tells you how to do this, tells you why you're doing this, and it gives you a reason to progress in the game. Alright, let's start off with what is the most important part of any racing game, the map and the physics of the car. Now, why is this such an important thing to take into consideration? This is important to look at because the map needs to match how the cars feel, their physics, and vice versa. Here's an example in case you're still a little lost. Imagine that you're playing a racing game that is set in a tight, densely packed city with lots of traffic that you have to dodge and sharp turns. You would want the cars to be lightweight, nimble, able to make quick adjustments at breakneck speeds to be able to dodge all of that traffic and handle those tight city turns. If the cars in the game were heavy machines that were more specialized for wide turns and aren't as nimble, you'd be crashing into traffic or the walls very frequently. This exact scenario is what happened with the 2012 version of Most Wanted, where the map was a tight city, but the cars were heavy machines that could not dodge traffic or handle tight turns all that well.
Clear my throat. I don't know! At least I'm in third fucking place. Who the...
On the other hand, if the game has massive open roads with sparse in comparison traffic, the game needs to have heavier cars that have a sense of weight to them when you turn and drift. If you had the lightweight, nimble cars in here, the game would become very boring since you'd be able to take corners and dodge traffic so easily that you could do it in your sleep. And as a racing game, it is so important that it gets its map and car physics right, as this is the whole point of a racing game. If the core racing is messed up, then the whole rest of the game will suffer because of it. Thankfully though, 05 Most Wanted absolutely nails it when it comes to the act of driving. This era of Need for Speed had rather grippy cars that were more accustomed to handling those tight city turns, or at least turns that were smaller and tighter than something like Hot Pursuit, to give an example. And 05 Most Wanted, as stated earlier, is no exception. Therefore, the core racing experience is fully intact, which is the most crucial part to any racing video game. There are actually a good number of race types for you to choose from. You have circuits where you race around a course for either 2 or 3 laps, sprints where you get from point A to point B, lap knockout where each lap the driver in last gets eliminated until there's only one driver left, Toll booths, where you have to get from point A to point B in a limited amount of time, and crossing toll booths along the way provides time bonuses to help you out. Speed traps, where there are checkpoints on the map that capture your speed at that moment, and whoever has the highest combined speed at the end wins. And drag races, where it's another point A to B event, but with an emphasis on manually shifting gears and changing lanes. The races themselves are for the most part well built. Circuits, sprint races, and lap knockout events behave as you would expect and have no mechanical troubles to them or otherwise any fundamental flaws. The only complaint that I have regarding these three is that lap knockout events can be a bit long with it being 3 laps, but there's nothing fundamentally wrong with it. However, toll booth events are often way too easy, as I found myself finishing these events with 30 seconds to spare, with an instance or two of me having nearly a full minute in spare time. But I can't bash on a mode being easy, as it then serves as a good way to grind the game to get some more cash to upgrade your rides. Not that you'll need to do that much, thankfully. That, and a mechanic in Most Wanted that I'll discuss later on, makes this event a godsend. Speed traps work well enough, but I ran into a handful of these events that had awful placements for the traps. Most of these events are alright, but there are a number of these that have sudden sharp turns that don't encourage high speeds, which defeats the purpose of this race type. Drag races, however, Nelly, the drag races. These are an entirely different story. As stated before, with drag races, it's an event where you get from point A to B, but how this plays out is much different. The game sets up lanes instead of allowing you to steer freely. You steer into new lanes to avoid traffic or any other obstacles while shifting gears manually. However, the fundamental flaw with drag races in this game is that the game is unable to keep you in your current lane during turns. This can result in scenarios where, for example, if a traffic car is in the lane to your right, but then you begin a left turn, the game will sort of drift your car into that right lane, slamming you into the traffic car and totaling your vehicle. This results in you having to move over 2 lanes just to be on the safe side. It also doesn't help that a lot of drag races feature an intersection that has traffic crossing it or the occasional hill that leaves you picking a lane and praying that there's no traffic on the other side, which makes it just about impossible to win drag races on your first try. Drag races come down to trial and error as a result, and if it comes down to it, muscle memory. Thankfully though, drag races aren't very common and I hardly ever found myself pressed to do one during the career. After you complete the required number of races and reach the required bounty, you get to challenge a blacklist member. These races behave as any other normal race except it's just a 1v1, and they play out just as good, again, aside from the drag races. It also helps that for every time you challenge a blacklist member, there's a cool intro cinematic for the first race you challenge them in. After these events, you get to pick 2 reward cards out of a total of 6, which can have anything from extra cash, a get out of jail for free card, the rival racer's pink slip that allows you access to their car, etc. The only disappointing thing about this list is that for a large majority of the racers on here, the best that they get in the character development department is a photo along with some text. On rare occasions, a blacklist member will call you and try to act tough, but that's about as good as it gets. I didn't feel invested into the opponent that I was racing against. That didn't take away from the satisfaction of beating them, but at the same time, they could have been fleshed out a little more. Perhaps the game could have played around with more of the green screen style cutscenes or included in-game cinematics like how Carbon did. Now, let's talk about the actual racing itself. As I stated earlier, the combination of the map and the car physics match beautifully here. Outside of that critical combination though, the rest of the driving experience is really good too. The controls feel fluid and natural, and the button layout makes sense. The sense of speed in this game is great, and nails what players are looking for in a driving game. Cars are able to steer through the game's turns with relative ease, with only the super sharp turns that not even Speed Brake can handle being the only problematic corners. However, there are a few parts of the map that have become notorious for me, particularly the areas where there's an incline turn that forces your car to go off-road for a bit, allowing the AI to easily overtake you. It's either go off the road for a bit or slow down so much to stay on the road, but either you lose your spot or lose the distance advantage you had. Traffic is here as it is in any other game that has you illegally street racing, and I have to admit, I do feel as if there's just a bit too much traffic on the roads for each event. Traffic in this game can quickly cost you the distance advantage you had, cost you the lead momentarily in a race, or cost you the race win itself. Thankfully though, when you collide into traffic outside of drag races, it doesn't total your car. It is really infuriating though when your run is ruined by factors outside of your control thanks to RNG. I know that's part of what makes illegal street racing in video games so thrilling and intense, that at any point something can go wrong, but I still cannot deny that it is really infuriating to have to retry an event because Mac over here just so happened to be at this precise part of the track at this precise moment. Because it is such an integral part of Need for Speed though, I'm not going to let the traffic dock my opinion on the game, as this kind of frustration is expected with these kinds of games. Despite that though, it is still a very solid combination of the map and car physics. Alright, now it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. Those of you that have played 05 Most Wanted will know what I mean. At the beginning of the game, I found myself winning races pretty easily. Most Wanted follows the path of beginning with an easy vehicle against easy opponents, which does result in the opening hours being fairly uneventful. A large number of races at the start resulted with me having won for miles ahead of the competition, which is something that I can't complain about too much in the grand scheme of things. For anyone who is brand new to this game, it makes sense why the devs would want the opening hours to be this easy. You want players to be eased into the experience, to give them a reason to want to continue. You want players to have these opening hours be their time to get acclimated to the game so that they're ready to tackle the tougher opponents later on. You want players to feel good about themselves, because then it's more likely they'll keep playing. However, after those opening hours, the game decides to suddenly knee-jerk into the other direction. Suddenly, the game was mentally exhausting to play from how brutally difficult it was. All of a sudden, I had to drive a lot more defensively, and if I was overtaken, then that pretty much spelled the end of my race most of the time, even if I was only halfway through it. The opponents were all of a sudden super freaking quick, and if they wiped themselves out at the start, I would have a good advantage for a bit of the race, but then just a minute or so later, by bending the power of space and time, they would be right up on my bumper again. It was as if the advantage that I had gained meant nothing in the end. What the heck happened? This is when I reached the point in my Most Wanted playthrough where I began dreading playing this game. To give you an idea on how it went for me, the opening hours of this game were fun, the middle hours were the worst, and towards the end of the game, things became fun again. You want to know why those middle hours were so painful? The rubber banding, or as this game calls it, catch-up. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, in racing games, rubber banding is a system in place that prevents players from getting too far ahead of the competition. In theory, this makes it so that racing games aren't just a boring slog of you winning by miles. You would be on your toes for the whole race instead of trying not to fall asleep at the wheel from how easy it all is. If an opponent then overtakes you, the rubber banding would be reduced at some point to give you a chance to catch back up and to allow you to make an attempt to retake your position. Now, I do understand that driving games have a higher complication when it comes to the difficulty. Instead of difficulty being determined solely by the ferocity of the AI, the game also has to take into account the player and their driving skill. That's not to say other video games don't keep this in mind. Someone who is brand new to a first-person shooter shouldn't play a Call of Duty campaign on veteran difficulty, for example. However, for those games, it's to a lesser extent. The AI in that COD game on veteran difficulty is locked into how difficult they are. They stay at veteran. They don't drop down to regular difficulty to give the player an easier time after they die 2 or 3 times, then suddenly rubber band back to veteran difficulty after the player gets a multi-kill or 2 with their grenade launcher. Racing games, especially ones like Most Wanted where you don't get an option to set the opponents on an easy, medium, or hard difficulty, has an additional complication in the fact that it has to take into account how good or bad a player is doing. If the player is ahead, the AI's aggressiveness is turned up. If the player is having a rough time, the AI is supposed to turn its aggressiveness down. The difficulty in this instance is fluid, constantly changing. That's what makes handling things like rubber banding in racing games so difficult. After the opening hours, Most Wanted became a bit dreadful to play. I had actually developed a sort of system where I would prioritize different race types based on how difficult they would be, followed by whether cop probability was low or high, followed then by how long each event would take. I would prioritize toll booth events first, since I wouldn't have to worry about any rubber banding AI. Then, believe it or not, I would do any drag races, since those events relied on trial and error based on the traffic more so than fighting the rubber banding AI. Then I would do sprint races, since it's just from point A to B and was generally shorter than the other remaining race types. Next up on the list would be speed traps, since they're all sprint races but with checkpoints for speed. Then I would do 2-lap circuits, and then if I had no other options left, I would do 3-lap circuits or lap knockout events. The rubber banding in Most Wanted is so bad that I was willing to torture myself through trial and error sessions of drag races before doing any of the other events listed below that on my priorities list. To quote the YouTuber Chipflake here,
That is a big yikes for me, my friend.
thankfully though, towards the end of the game is when things tend to be less painful. Having access to better cars at this point, I wasn't locked into the mid-tier range of cars. I found myself winning by considerable distances again, and at most there would be 2 drivers nipping at my bumper instead of all 3 of them. This is what kept me from beating Most Wanted up until recently. This is unfortunately something that can make or break a player's experience, and for me, it broke it. To the point where I quit multiple times when I was a kid, and only a few months ago was I actually able to beat it for the first time. I spent around a third of my time with this game dreading going into the races, and if the racing in your racing game is something that players want to avoid at any point in their playthrough for any reason, then something is wrong with it. However, there's also the other side of the coin when it comes to Most Wanted's 2 main ways of progressing through the blacklist. In order to be able to challenge the blacklist racers, you have to show them that you can handle the heat. Which brings us to what Most Wanted is most famous for, and is something that is hard to come by in modern-day racing games that involve police chases. Most Wanted is known for evolving the intense police chases that the series has had. Let me tell you that these pursuits are intense, they are engaging, they are stress-inducing, they are relieving, they are so many emotions that this is easily Most Wanted's best innovation in the Need for Speed series. In Most Wanted, you have what's called a bounty, which is used to determine your notoriety with the Rockport Police. Each blacklist member requires you to have more and more bounty as you climb the list. When you initiate a pursuit with the police, all bets are off. When you access the main menu, you can tune your vehicle very slightly and resume the pursuit. There's no backing out of a pursuit if things start going south, aside from quitting to the dashboard, but... In a pursuit, there are 5 different conditions, more commonly known as heat levels. The higher the heat, the more determined and fierce the cops will be, but also the higher the bounty you can achieve. For heat level 1, it's just basic cop cruisers. For heat level 2, it's undercover versions of the cruisers, and once in a blue moon they'll deploy cruiser roadblocks. By heat level 3, the state police get involved with heavier cruisers that you can't just run off the road so easily. This is also when roadblocks become more common, and this is when they begin sending Rhino units after you, SUVs that are specifically designed to charge you head on to slam into you. Heat level 4 sees undercover versions of the state vehicles, roadblocks with spike strips that will end a pursuit in seconds if you run over one, and at this heat level, the helicopter comes out. Heat level 5 is when the feds are sent to stop you in Corvettes, including Cross, and all of the tools are deployed against you. Roadblocks, spike strip roadblocks, SUV roadblocks, heavier Rhino units, and a more aggressive helicopter that will actually decrease altitude and try to shove into you. All of that comes into play here. During these pursuits, you rack up bounty, and you can earn extra bounty by completing milestones, such as trading paint with a designated number of cops, escaping a pursuit under a certain time, staying in a pursuit for a certain amount of time, punching through a number of roadblocks, etc. This is easily the best part of Most Wanted, as these pursuits keep you on your toes from start to finish, and these pursuits can be especially nerve-wracking, since if you're busted, all of the progress you made during that pursuit is erased. All of the milestones you completed, all the bounty you've acquired, all of it is gone if you get busted in a pursuit. And the vehicle that you were driving gets an impound strike. 3 strikes, or however many strikes if you use an extra impound strike that you got through the blacklist rewards, and the vehicle is then permanently seized. Probably my favorite aspect of these pursuits are the radios, specifically the voice acting for the officers. The voice acting here is amazing, as officers truly convey their emotions based on the situation, whether it be you slamming into a traffic car, punching through a roadblock, having rolled over a spike strip, running through a gas station, etc. They can even be heard interacting with each other. If you make a mistake and crash, they'll comment on your bad driving skills.
I'm trying to get through. Yeah, we're about to slow down.
Or if the pursuit has been going on for a while and nothing has stopped you yet, one officer may start to lose faith and want to pull back, but another officer will chime in and attempt to boost morale again by telling him to not give up.
Slow it down till we can clear the area. No, do not fall out. Keep the pressure on him. We will stop him.
Lastly, when you're ready to officially end a pursuit, or if you need to temporarily take the heat off mid-pursuit, you're able to utilize pursuit breakers that, when triggered near any cops, their vehicles will be disabled. After breaking the police's line of sight for a period of time, you'll enter cooldown mode, where the cops will set up a perimeter based on your last known position in an attempt to find you. The higher the heat level, the slower that cooldown meter fills up. However, if you're able to find a hiding spot, that'll effectively secure your escape from the pursuit, as the cooldown meter fills up much faster in those areas, and only in the most rare of circumstances will a cop regain line of sight with you. Okay, so outside of the actual racing, how about the game's other mechanics? Thankfully, those are all very solid. You're able to take the cash that you get from races to purchase new vehicles and to upgrade and customize them. The game has 32 cars to choose from, and it's a pretty solid selection. My favorite thing about Most Wanted's cars, however, is in how you can customize them. You're able to upgrade the performance of your cars, which is crucial to winning you events, but even then, the rubber banding might still be too much for the upgrades to handle. And you're also able to customize the look of your car to truly make it your own. Granted, this customization system is a bit outdated due to games such as Need for Speed Heat giving players more customization options than ever, and even some older titles like Underground and Underground 2 had more options, but what's given us to us here is really good. You're able to change the body kit, add spoilers, change the paint, add any vinyls, decals, numbers, heck, you're even able to customize your speedometer. Most Wanted's customization is still something to be quite amazed by, even if the series has innovated since then. The game's sound design is really good too. Everything from the car's engines, to the sound of the nitro being used, to the sirens from the police, to the sound of vehicles slamming into one another during a pursuit is all good here. The game's soundtrack, while nothing that I would find myself listening to outside of the game, gets the job done quite nicely as background music. The original soundtrack for this game, which is only heard when the police chases happen, is my personal favorite bit of this game's original soundtrack. That, coupled with some other non-copyrighted tracks from different games, are what you've been hearing throughout this video. And that brings us to the end of the review portion of the video. To give a quick recap, the story is not as heavily involved and is more simplistic, which in this case is a strong point to the game. It gives the player some context, a motivation to want to climb up the blacklist, and leaves it at that. The racing itself is for the most part very solid, and the controls and the feeling of speed is great, but it's ruined by brutal rubber banding AI. The map and physics match for the most part, as there is the occasional rough part of the map. The game features solid customization for your cars, a solid choice of cars, and the best implementation of the pursuit system in any mainstream game. Featuring a high-risk, high-reward bounty system, frantic communication between the cops, and tactics that increase in roughness as you increase your heat, this is, I say again, the best implementation of the pursuit system in the mainstream games to this day. This brings us to the second part of this video, where we address the million-dollar question for today. Why is 05 Most Wanted looked so fondly upon? Why is it to this day still regarded as one of the best, if not the best, Need for Speed title today? Based on my experience with the game, as well as some context for it, here's what I think. I think this game is remembered so fondly because, firstly, the actual game itself is overall very solid if you exclude the brutal rubber banding. Secondly, the import tuner culture was still going very strong at this point in time. Yeah, it really exploded during the early 2000s with films like The Fast and the Furious and with games like Underground and Underground 2. Nowadays, it's a staple to the series, but back then it was still sort of being confirmed to be a required part of the mainstream games. Like, it was after this game that everyone went, alright, this kind of customization is here to stay. Some could argue that mentality was after Underground 2, to which I'd say you'd probably be right. I feel like for some people it was after Underground 2, and then for others it was after Most Wanted. Thirdly, the pursuits. While this wasn't the first time pursuits had been added into a Need for Speed game before, and wasn't the first time that they've been so heavily involved into the gameplay of the game, this was the first time that they came out in true brutal force, making you put everything on the line. Lastly, a new generation of gamers were hopping on for the first time, so for a lot of people, Most Wanted carries some childhood nostalgia for them too. Okay, one more mini point here. It also helps that this game has aged well with the series going in new directions to varying degrees of success or failure as of late. I am going to be upfront and honest with you all. 05 Most Wanted is not my favorite Need for Speed game. That being said, I can totally understand why this would be someone's favorite. The core racing experience is very solid, the customization for the cars are great, the story is simplistic, to the point, and gives motivation, and the pursuits are nothing short of amazing. However, it's this game's rubber banding that really kills the experience for me. Sure, things like the occasional bad part of the track do add on to it, but that doesn't make me want to stop playing all by itself. The rubber banding, however, does. While I will admit, the rubber banding is not as bad as I remember it being from my childhood, it was still rough enough to cause me some serious frustration and to cause me to question myself once or twice why I decided to play and review this game. Despite my personal feelings on that aspect of the game though, I cannot deny that Most Wanted is a super solid game, especially compared to other entries today. I did get a fair amount of enjoyment from this game, and I can perfectly understand why Most Wanted is regarded in the high status that it is to this day. So, what do you think of 05 Most Wanted? Do you consider this to be your favorite Need for Speed game? Do you hate the rubber banding as much as I do? Do you not like the game as much? Now let's get a little discussion going on in the comments. With that all being said, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like, drop a comment, and if you really want to, you can hit that subscribe button and be sure to click that bell icon to receive all notifications for future uploads. And until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and peace out everyone.